we have Nigeria, who has a president saying that there's no genocide that's happening. And we're seeing thousands of Christians just recently being massacred.
125,000 Christians have been killed in Nigeria, including 600 clerics. 19,000 churches have been destroyed. 1,100 Christian communities displaced.
When I found out about Charlie, a part of me Charlie didn't stop. It didn't culminate in the fact that he was talking about politics. He lived that life and people saw Jesus through him.
Ruslan.
Okay, before we get into this video, guys, if you know me, you know that I am a huge fan of the hit show House of David, produced by my friend John Irwin and the amazing people over at Wonder Project. And so I already had the Wonder Project subscription within Amazon Prime watching House of David with my son, but I was even more ecstatic when they reached out to make sure that we get the word out about their brand new service within Amazon Prime. Now, it's not just for the House of David. When I signed up, I discovered that there's over 100 additional titles on here, edited versions of family favorites like The Patriot and Dead Poets Society and Antoine Fisher. Sandlot is on here. There are so many amazing titles on here. And the dope part is it's not just faith-based. There's a lot of Christian stuff on here, a lot of biblical stuff on here, but it's also value-based. And there's also like a new documentary on there with King and Country. And again, the best part about it is that you can watch it with your family without worrying about anything inappropriate popping up on the screen. It's only $8.99 a month, or you can save 17% by signing up for the entire year for only $89.99. And an annual subscription is a beautiful way to support the mission of the Wonder Project and also signal to the industry that this sort of entertainment that's faith-based and value-based is needed and demanded by our community. And it also helps the wonderful people at the Wonder Project continue creating and making amazing media. So hit the pinned comment and sign up for a free trial today, or better yet, save some money and sign up for an annual membership. Link is in the pinned comment and description. Let's jump into this conversation. Ladies and gentlemen, today's guest is, she has many things. She was once upon a time a juggernaut in the political conservative space, in the Second Amendment guns rights space, but she has kind of evolved and changed a bit. And so I'm excited to be talking to the one, the only, Antonia Cover. The sound effect. You're not supposed to hear the sound effects. Only I'm supposed to hear them. I got the settings all wrong. Hey, thanks so much for being here. You came a long way. And of course, we had our conversation on the clip about all the Candace Owens debacle. Tell a little bit about your background. You're Nigerian, which is interesting because of all the craziness that's happening in Nigeria right now. Yeah. So tell us like a little bit about your background, your story, and just your overall assessment of what's happening globally with your folks. And we'll get into more of your political rise and pivot.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me on. It's good to be here. My background, grew up in Dallas, Texas, to Nigerian parents, more specifically Igbo parents. Mm-hmm. For those who know who they know.
People are very specific and need to clarify that sort of stuff. Yes.
Now, let's be clear. I'm Igbo now. So, yeah, I grew up, in the 1990s, late 1990s. But essentially, single parent. My mom raised us. My father went to prison. Just very soft, easy story. My father went to prison for drug trafficking when I was young.
Were they immigrants too?
Yeah, they're immigrants. They're Nigerian immigrants. So essentially first generation. My brothers, I'm the oldest of four. So politically grew up, parents, my mom, Democrats, you're expected to do that same type of thing. But although grew up also Roman Catholic, my mom's a devout Roman Catholic. But I didn't have my own personal relationship with Jesus Christ until I went to college. And really it was in college that not only my own personal faith, I found that for myself. I also found though my own political, grounding and foundation at that time too. So this is 2008, 2009. So people probably already know reference politically. This is the height of President Obama, of the Obama movement and everything. which I was a part of in college for a little bit. But I also had a radical when I became a Christian, realizing that I couldn't reconcile the two. I couldn't reconcile where things were going politically with the Democrat Party at that time, particularly with abortion. My parents always put it into us about abortion and being pro-life. So even as Democrats growing up, we knew the abortion issue was a big issue, particularly as Catholics. So knowing and going into that space, that trajectory, there was no space for pro-life Democrats, really, I think was the one issue, particularly as a new Christian, that made me start realizing I don't think I'm ever going to have a space in the Democratic Party, and I need to start looking elsewhere.
And did your parents share that same sentiment because they were Catholics, or were they able to better compartmentalize the unborn versus you as you became Protestant?
Yeah, so definitely, I mean, my dad was in prison at this time, so he was in a different trajectory at this point in prison. At this point, he was Rastafarian. That's a whole other conversation. But my mother, definitely devout Catholic, and she's, at that time at least, she was able to say that, hey, as Black people, I don't think in America that we are safe in a different party. That was what I got a lot of, and that's why we're in the Democratic Party. But when it comes to like the actual values, particularly the pro-life stance, we're never going to support that, particularly as Catholics. So that was her strong stance then. It's a little bit different now, but that was her strong stance, especially then. And I had that value set at a young age. How
would you say her values have evolved?
Her values, I would say, I've definitely become more progressive. She's Catholic. But I've noticed a difference of, just the stuff that she's had to go through as a woman, a single mother, over the years, the decades that she's raised us and we're out of the house. Her views have become a little bit more progressive than they were before. I would say 20, 30 years ago when she was raising us. Yeah,
that's interesting. It's interesting to see, like I would say I was in a similar spot as you back in that era. And then I feel like my views generally have remained the same, but similarly not feeling accepted within anything center left at all. So it's like my views have remained the same, but the Overton window shifted so far left, where it's like, even the unborn isn't like, hey, this is what was the phrase, rare, safe, and legal or whatever.
Right.
Now it's like they got the bus outside of the Democratic Convention, and it's like celebrated, And so I've remained more or less the same, but the window has shifted so far left that I just kind of found myself amongst conservatives.
Yeah.
And would you say that was similar for you when you were coming to faith, that your kind of bare core essentials remained the same, but the more you came to faith and grew in your faith, that you just found yourself within alliances with conservatives?
Yeah, I think, and part of it also was just being clear and honest. I mean, just as being real, is that when you become a Christian, particularly in Texas, right? You quickly, and it's particularly, let's also be in reform spaces, because that's where I became a Christian. I went to in the Village Church in Dallas, and Matt Chandler.
Shout out Matt
Chandler.
Yes,
Chandler.
Yes. Everyone was reformed
teaching
back in that window of time. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So, I mean, but great teaching. But even, I mean, not say because of that church, but just being in that space, you quickly realize, well, maybe I should, I went from the Democratic Party. Okay, now I need to be on the Republican Party. So I was kind of feeling a little bit of that I need to be on the other side, even though I never fit. And I think that's why it's important that I tell my story of becoming a Christian first. It wasn't that I changed value systems or anything like that politically. Beforehand, before I became a Christian, I became a Christian first. And I think that has changed me in different ways as well. But I think because of that nuance there, that I've been able to be in that space of the nuance versus only being in one central party, shifting from one to another. But I was, for a long time, I would say maybe almost a decade, particularly politically, people would say, hey, there's Antonia. She's that conservative. She's a Second Amendment girl. She's the Republican person, Yeah. I was kind of safely in that space for a while.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of that tension. We were talking about it offline a little bit, right? Like there's a lot of folks that are conservative and Christian, but there's a difference between being a conservative and Christian versus being a Christian who is conservative.
Right.
Right. And I think that would also depend on what are we trying to conserve specifically, right? There are definitely things that are absolutely worth conserving. But then there are other things, like I would say the unborn. I don't want to conserve the status quo with the unborn. I actually want to get radically progressive is not the right word because of all the stuff that's lumped in, but I want to make progress in the area of the unborn.
Right.
And a lot of my friends who are in that space want to change hearts and minds, but also change laws, you know?
Right.
And so it's like, I don't want to conserve the Roe v. Wade democratic arm of that view, right? So it's all in like, what do these things mean regarding that? But in terms of being a Christian before a conservative, what is that? How does that practically look like for you as someone that was fairly predominant in the space, and especially within Black conservative circles? How has that shifted for you?
Yeah, I think it's easy, particularly in the Protestant space, right? Again, I wasn't being disingenuous of this, of the fact that the pro-life issue was so important to me. But I think even more so, things change even in the environment, the circles I was in when I really came out with the Second Amendment. And I've told people the story of even how that came out. That actually came out a lot from my past of being a feminist, right? That's kind of how I made that trajectory and that change of being in the Second Amendment space, of being pro-feminism, being trying to empower women, right? Trying to empower myself. Part of my story is that I'm a sexual assault survivor, and I've talked about that story. And I think Christ has used that also to heal me and bring me to himself through that story of, realizing that I can't heal myself. And I went to Christ because of it. So having that almost convoluted, but almost having a lot of those types of spaces come together, being a Christian, being a woman who wanted to empower other women, and then talking about the Second Amendment, I think is what really brought me more into like the libertarian liberty space, and also being able to kind of safely stay in that policy aspect versus having to be just the Republican girl, right? So I kind of stayed in that, particularly when I started Empower 2A, which was our motto was rights are women's rights, right? So I got to kind of stay in that in between of that nuance of, hey, I'm not going to just dismiss the fact that there are things that are important things that the left brings up, like what do we do with sexual assault? What do we do with these women who are victimized? But how do we do it was informed by me being a Christian. So I think that was the difference.
Yeah, I want to get into the Second Amendment because that's there's a lot of folks that are, Christians are supposed to be pacifist and this whole thing, right? But would you say you kind of connected the 2A cause to the overflow of you having experienced SA? Unpack that for me. Is like, do you feel like in hindsight you would have been better equipped to avoid assault had you been more equipped to handle a firearm? Like, how does all that work together?
I think it comes. Do I think that? I mean, I was young, so. No, do I think the firearm in that situation would have been the practical sense for me as a young person who was a victim of that? No.
Are you talking like you were a child?
I was a child.
Okay,
yeah, I was a child when that happened. For me, it's more of having the conversation on college campuses, for one, and that's when that conversation started. It was in, again, 2009, 2010, talking about the rise of, or the epidemic of what was going on college campuses in regards to SA specifically, and people having those conversations. But then also the fact of, the conversation always, if you were on the left, ending with, well, it's the perpetrator's fault, right? We have to focus on the perpetrator, but then not ever having, I think, that another step in that conversation of, well, what can I do? Because look, I'm a victim, and unfortunately, the statistics show that victims are usually re-victimized in the future, right? So it's not that just because I was victimized when I was young that then I'm not going to be victimized later, right? So what can we do to give that power back? That's what I was interested in, and of not only letting the government and people in that space make that decision for me. I wanted that power back. And so honestly, a lot of my conversations even go like stemming into that motto of rights, women's rights, and talking about that aspect of the Second Amendment empowering women came from self-reliance, came from that message, right? Not necessarily a Christian value, not that you can't, have independence and take care of yourself. But ultimately, it did stem from how do I give power back in a way that has not been given to me in this sphere of the political party up until this point.
How would you say your views have shifted in terms of self-reliance? Because I think someone can be a Christian and vote Democrat in the sense that like I think they can be wrong and still love Jesus, right? But I do think that the conservative arm, not in every way, but in more ways, is more compatible with the Christian worldview, right? And so the Second Amendment is one of those things that I feel like is more compatible with the Christian worldview. When we look at the scriptures and we see, people say Jesus sent him out and he told him not to bring a sword and not to bring a bag. And it's like the second time he tells him to bring a sword and to bring a bag, right? So I think there's a more congruent alliance regarding the Second Amendment cause and a Christian worldview, self-reliance, protecting yourself, being a protector, right? So on and so forth. Would you say your views have changed on that? Would you say you've gotten, because you were fairly deep in that world and the way it overlaps with feminism in a way. How has that evolved for you?
I think it's almost comparing it to this, but I think particularly for a Christian audience, to be able to see this analogy of that we're not, when Jesus says that he's not doing away with the law, but he's there to fulfill the law, that it's not that I'm doing away with the fact that self-reliance is there's an aspect of self-reliance is important. There's an aspect of we need to promote, obviously, this given right for us to defend ourselves. I mean, Exodus 22:2. There's so many things that show in the Bible that we should defend ourselves, and pacifism is not the way, because clearly in the Old Testament and New Testament, Jesus has shown us, the Bible has shown us in Scripture, that we are able to defend and preserve life. And we should do that in many different aspects, including through the Second Amendment, the right to self-defense and to preserve life, particularly innocent life. But it is not the ultimatum. It's not the ultimate. When we think our strength only comes from that, when we stop there, I think that's the problem.
Got it.
Is that we need to know that there is a greater power, there's a greater strength, there is somebody that we really rely on, and we can't rely on ourselves. I mean, the Bible tells us that, and that would be, to say that we stop there would say that would be contrary to the Bible. But I think it's that to know that is the right comes from something that is given to us, a God-given right that is more powerful and above that. I think that we need to have that full conversation. Otherwise, in itself, in isolation, I think that's where we have people who are conservatives, but they're not Christian. Yeah,
because the idea of rights have to come from a God or something outside of ourselves, right? The idea of human rights. And so one of the ultimate rights is the right to defend yourself and exist.
Absolutely.
And so if you don't have a transcendent being that's giving us these rights, then it's so easy for people to just slide into their identity being this right to bear arms, and then they got the gear, and then they got the guns, and it's like everything about their world becomes, I'm the Second Amendment guy who is probably a prepper, who is it has a military leaning, and there's nothing wrong with those things in and of themselves.
I mean, that's that girl, right?
But it's like when that becomes your primary identifier, I think that's the issue. And this is true for all things. This is true for ethnicity. This is true for the broader political alignment that you have. This could be true for your denomination. When anything gets in the way of Jesus defining you, it could be a problem, even if they're good things.
Right. Absolutely. I think, and that you can use that for anything. Right. I think that's at the end of it informs us as we're Christians first. And I also think that also makes us, unfortunately, we know that this world is not our home. Right. And that therefore we are going to always be politically homeless. We're never going to be in a space that feels completely comfortable for us. It shouldn't be. That's how it is as a Christian in many aspects, whether it's socially or economically or financially or even, of course, politically. And so I think that's part of my evolution, transformation, renewal kind of in this space right now is, I'm a mother now. I have, kids and I'm married. But it's also just God continuously speaking to me through those, the word and the Holy Spirit saying, you know what, I think this was a good, for now, that was a good time for a space. And I do believe completely that Empowered 2A was a space that God wanted me to be in. And he wanted me to also preach the word. I got opportunities to preach the word through that, kind of much like how Charlie, he was always preaching the word, even though he was talking about politics and stuff like that. I think that's an example of what it should look like, is that we utilize any space that we're in, any topic we're in, and then ultimately point people to him, to Jesus. And if we're not pointing people to Jesus and we just stop there, I think that's the problem.
Yeah, that's good. You came up, rubbing shoulders with Charlie. You came up in that world. Tell me what that was like, and what are your overall thoughts on where things are with regards to the political, right? The overlap of Christians, and a lot of Christians, seemingly a lot of young people coming to Christianity through, I would say, the work of Charlie Kirk, through the work of even what Daily Wire is doing, Turning Point USA is doing, these folks. What do you make of that?
I'm thrilled to see. I'm thrilled to see what it's looked like since. I'm thrilled to see. Unfortunately, I hate to see what had to happen in order for this to happen. But even when I found out about Charlie, a part of me just, if it was anyone who would be able to have this reaction, it would have been him, because he was faithful in his time here to Christ. He did what he needed to do while he was here, through what the Holy Spirit was telling him to do, and he was obedient in that, and we're seeing that fruit in that. My concern is going forward is hopefully that this is a revival and not a moment. I don't want this to be a moment. And it's very frustrating, to say the least, of people who've made, honestly, what I was seeing, like just the weeks after even the memorial, and seeing a memorial where we have Chris Tomlin, we have these people who are leaders in the faith, and almost the whole cabinet there talking about, preaching the gospel message and talking about Christ and worshiping, thousands of people worshiping Christ. That's through the work of what Jesus did, of course, but the fact that that Charlie didn't stop. It didn't culminate in the fact that he was talking about politics. He lived that life and people saw Jesus through him. I'm concerned, outside of Erica, who I know is someone who loves the Lord, and I'm so thankful that she's a CEO and that Turning Point is in the right direction, and they have someone who loves the Lord just as much as Charlie. And I got to see that in person when I was with the Falkirk Center and working with Erica. Is that we need more people like Charlie. We need people who are not just champions of debate in the conservative space, right? We need people who are going to speak the truth in love, because they have the Holy Spirit convicting them when they need to back off and when they need to speak up. And I only see that happening if we have other brothers and sisters in Christ take up the mantle and continue the work that Charlie also did, as well as other people who were vocal about things like this. So I'm just concerned about what it's going to look like in the future, if it's going to be more a conservative voice, or it's going to be the Christian conservatives who are going to speak up and continue on. That's where I think the difference is going to be. The real turning point is going to be going forward. Yeah,
that's good. I think I'm with you. I think, and some of that requires calling out stuff and poison on the right. We talked about on the clip that we did on the Candace Owens things. We talked about Nick Fuentes. The ironic part is that church attendance is up. Folks are coming back to church. I think some of that is a direct through line to Charlie, but I think there's already stuff happening prior to that. Bible sales going up, Bible downloads going up. Church attendance, the first time, I want to say in modern history, that young men are coming to church in greater percentages than young women.
Yeah.
So I think like all of that is amazing. But there's also like real global issues happening, right? We talked a little bit offline about like October 7th, and you were like, man, like regarding 2A, like if that something like that were to happen in America, would people be ready to defend themselves, right?
Yeah.
I think that's a really valid like question that I think people need to ask, and specifically like I think all people, but women, men, especially in major cities that have crazy laws. Like I'm having to jump through a lot of hoops just to get my conceal and carry here. Right. So connect that thought to me. Like, why is that important? Again, without it making the single identifying marker for people.
Yeah. I mean, even, with the October 7th, it was that realization, I mean, that came about because of so many people coming to me afterwards, being concerned, of faith, right, of the Jewish faith too, but just people in general who say, you know what, I'm for the Second Amendment. And I would just like, that's great. All right, so what are you doing? What have you been doing up until this point, right? Because they're concerned about what's going to happen the next couple of weeks, right? We don't have time for what are you doing right now? I mean, what did you do before? And that conversation of, well, I mean, I haven't done anything was frustrating, but also telling of, you can't just stop at the fact that you support the Second Amendment. If you don't exercise the Second Amendment, when it actually is going to benefit you, will you be benefited?
Mm-hmm.
Will your family be benefited? And particularly men, I was just thinking about, like, we're just talking about biblical manhood. Let's talk about biblical womanhood. Biblical manhood requires for you to die, right, for your woman. When you die for your wife, for your spouse, die for your family. But are you prepared? Are you going to be the one who's going to actually be able to fight if in case something like that happens? Or are you just going to hope and pray that things don't happen the way that they're probably going to happen because you brought a knife to the gunfight, right? So that alone, with those conversations of that fear, that aspect of we don't want to be at that spot. There's a reason why the Second Amendment's in place in the first place, is to make us a place that where people are not going to see us as a soft target, right? That we're trained, but that requires training. That requires men and women, particularly men, who are going to lead their families and make sure that they are prepared if they have to defend and preserve their kids, their family, their loved ones. And I think that's part of manhood, is not only that you are ready to do that, but are you trained to do that? And I think that's what I didn't see. And so I think when it comes down to the Second Amendment, if you support it, that's great. But if you don't exercise it, that leaves us where we would have been if we didn't have the Second Amendment.
Yeah, no, that's good. I mean, I'm walking through it in real time of, again, I applied for my conceal and carry. I'm trying to figure out what I want to carry. So I'm doing a bunch of research. I went on Sean Ryan and talked to his friend, to his team, and we're talking, and I'm like, yeah, like I'm thinking about a Glock 43, and then they're like, oh, Glocks are entry level, and I'm like, I thought a Glock was like the Mac of the firearm, right? And they're like, no, those are entry level. You like, and then I'm texting with him, and he's like, hey, like SIG 365 or a Hellcat.
Yeah.
And so I'm just like trying to do this research, and then I go in, like I went to Bass Pro, I went to Turner's here, and I go in, and it's like I gotta get a number just to even test anything out. You know, it's like, it's crazy the hoops you got to jump through to train. It's to even figure out what you want to buy.
Right. Yeah.
Just because it's there's a lot of people that are, and then California banned Glocks. January.
Oh my goodness.
Like this is crazy.
Yeah, it's California. I don't, as beautiful as the state is,
well, as a
I
public,
go back to Indiana and I'm like, oh, look, my
like, as a public figure, like I want to be able to defend myself and defend my family, and you, like, we live in a very normal home. Like there's not a bunch of security. This isn't a gated community. So that's the heart for me. But I think in the broader question of, hey, what happened to Charlie, right? October 7th. And the sad part about October 7th is that I've been to those kibbutz, right, in southern Israel. One, those are the most pro-Palestinian secular Jews that are in Israel, is all around Gaza, right? Like they're living in these like kind of hippy-dippy lives where they're growing all their own food. And two, they had the least amount of gun rights. Like Israel has really strict gun laws unless you served in the military. And that's really sad that those are the folks who ended up getting taken out. You know, if they all were armed, could that have gone different? I don't know. You know, I don't know if that could have played out different, but it is interesting to see like those are the folks that took the biggest hit.
Well, I think about specifically that really got me was the story of the couple with the twins. I think they're 10-month-old twins that they tell the story of how they try to protect their children, they try to protect their twins. And I just think about over and over of like if they had an ability to have a firearm and just able to have a fighting chance, but they didn't. They didn't have a fighting chance. And that really got me because that became personal. That became something that relatable, that anybody could be in that situation.
Right.
You're at home and someone comes to take the lives of your loved ones. What do you do? What as a mom, as a husband, or as a, you know, like as a father, what do you do? And then also could you do the best you could possibly do in that situation? Well, not if you don't have something that is at least same type of firepower as the other people, the other person that they're using, if not even more so. Because sometimes it's not. I mean, go think about Nigeria. Like I think about Nigeria and how people are being killed still with machetes. Still to this day, like at the end of the day, we take for granted the firepower that we can use, and to use it to defend people's lives, not to take them. Yeah,
I think the interesting part about Nigeria is the very people, especially on the right, that have been very critical of Israel. And I think there is a time and a place to be critical of Israel, right? Like when they went in and they had their own, the IDF going in, and there was hostages, Israeli hostages that were killed by the IDF, right? Like I think that's like what's going on, guys? Like what are we doing? You know? And it's like, well, it's a mistake. It was an accident. And it's like, okay, well, can we have some less accidents? Because you guys are shooting at churches, and you know, I think there's a time and a place to have proper critique of Israel. But I think the part that is sad is that the very people that are really critical of Israel, specifically the Candace Owens, the Tucker Carlson, the Nick Fuentes, seem to be very quiet in terms of what's happening in Nigeria right now. Break down what is happening as a Nigerian. Ibu, did I say that correctly? Igbo, to be specific. Yeah, break some of that down. And why do you think there isn't more of a outspoken zeal for the folks in Nigeria?
Well, I mean, just going back into the history of even like the last 50 years. So there was, for those who don't know about, I mean, in 1967, there was a civil war called the Biafran War. And that was after decades of the Igbo people and Christians in general feeling a lot of what we're seeing in full display today of being ostracized, of being kicked out of the government, being kicked out of different things, that they realized that they needed to have their own, they needed to secede from Nigeria. And so that was the Biafran War. They did not, that was like 4 years after the independence from England, when Nigeria gained their independence from England. And essentially England sides with the Nigerian government and helps essentially keep Nigeria together without having the, Biafra have their own state. I'm going to bring it back to this, but my claim is that if we really truly want to help Christians in Nigeria, we need to advocate for Biafra again. And there's a movement that's still been there since the last 50 years that they've had that secession and that civil war. But we're seeing in full display what we've been seeing, honestly, for decades. We've seen the changes of Lagos being the capital of Nigeria to Abuja, which is a very predominantly Muslim area of Nigeria. We've seen Goodluck Jonathan, who was a profound Christian leader, be called weak and be called ineffective, to the point where we've had even other entities in America and foreign policy get involved with the current administration that we have now in Nigeria. From 2009 to today, we have over 100,000 Nigerian Christians who've been killed, who've been kidnapped. I mean, much less talking about Boko Haram and all the extremist Islamic groups that have just been sitting there in Nigeria, honestly, for the most part, unencumbered, right? So, and then now we have Nigeria who has a president saying that there's no genocide that's happening. And we're seeing thousands of Christians just recently being massacred, saying that there's no genocide of Christians in Nigeria. So now it's just, all of that has been happening. People know there's corruption in Nigeria. Probably people know about that. People probably know that that there's a lot of Christians there, but they don't know that Nigeria is progressively becoming more of a Muslim country, and they're doing that through force, not through conversion. It's through force, and through force has been killing people, and those who are not converting to Islam. And so, I believe a lot of other Biafrans who would say they were Biafrans, the Igbo people, a lot of Christians would believe that in order for Christians in Nigeria to really be safe, they need to have their own state, just much like we saw with Sudan and South Sudan, where the Christians had to form South Sudan. We need to see that in Nigeria.
Our Black Friday sale is here, and one of the items that we get the most amount of feedback on is our devotional bundle. where you can get yourself our Bless God Prayer Journal, our Bless God Leadership Planner, and the 60-day Occupy Till I Come devotional available right now. You can get one for yourself, and then you have some stuff to give to your friends or family for Christmas. A great way to think of that loved one. And we also have limited edition signed copies of my USA Today best-selling book, Godly Ambition. It's on sale now. Go to blessgod.co and pick yours up. You're saying there needs to be a separation?
There needs to be a separation.
Like of like new boundaries?
Biafra was the state that was for about almost 3 years that they had in Nigeria. And that was to protect the Christians, to have their own space.
And when did that fall?
And that fell after the Biafran War in the late 1960s.
Okay, and that was before or after that independence?
So they had a short independence for a couple years, but then to keep that land, they had to go through the war, and then that ended in the late 1960s.
1960s, and then you said Britain supported which side, the Muslim side or the
Britain supported Nigeria to keep Nigeria together. So before that, it was under British rule in 1963. That's when they gained their independence from England. France actually briefly also tried to help and support Biafra as well. It all came down to, at the end of the day, I mean, where oil is in Nigeria, and that's mostly in the southern side of Nigeria. So there was a lot of stake there. There was a treaty also that was in place beforehand that also incentivized larger powers like England to be on that side. So for many reasons, people would say of why that didn't occur. I mean, the biggest reason why people died in that war is because of hunger. Most people died because of hunger there. It wasn't even weaponry; it was hunger. But all of that was strategic, and all of that's been in place for a long time. But we're seeing since the 1980s, when there was a literal dictator, right? The current, just the 2009 president that was there, Buhari, who was there before all this. Buhari, who was there before all of this. He was actually part of the dictatorship that happened in the 1980s. And I know I've been talking to my mother about this too, and about like, why did we see even to a point where we saw Catholics in Nigeria who were supporting a Muslim president? That was right before Goodluck Jonathan was there. Well, after Goodluck Jonathan was there, who was a Christian president. And the consensus is, and I've seen this too when I've worked with Afghani and Iraqi and Syrian refugees, is that when you get to a place where your safety is paramount, sometimes it's more comfortable to support stability than have to deal with the idea that maybe the reason why we have kidnapped girls, why we have people who can't even have westernized education or et cetera, like what's going on in Nigeria, and this is 2009 with Boko Haram. Why do we have Boko Haram kidnapping our children? Maybe instead of that, if we at least go back to the safety, the proposed safety, alluded safety that we had in the 80s and the people who were associated with that, then that would be better for us in the long run to have stability over having freedom, over having religious freedom, right? And so that's what I see, is that after that was a concession of, well, we want safety and we want stability for Nigeria, and that means perhaps instead of a Christian president, we need a openly Muslim and also openly part of a dictatorship, a previous dictatorship of Nigeria, for us to move forward and be the prosperous nation that everybody in Nigeria knows that Nigeria should be. But now I think openly we are seeing where a very Muslim president in Nigeria, who not only is that not allowing, it's not as if it's okay, well, he's Muslim, okay, what's wrong with that? But he's allowing Christians to live in peace with them. No, we're not seeing any of that. If anything, we're seeing an uptick of these murders and kidnappings and killings of Christians, and this is a genocide of Christians, and the government now is complicit with that as well.
So it sounds like the Christians or the Catholics that picked this Muslim president in 2009, that kind of backfired on them.
Right.
And now the government is officially denying that there's a genocide. But clearly, like there was the viral video of I want to say the priest or the pastor, in the graves
calling for President Trump to help.
Yeah. Do you think they're going to help?
I think this is our time to do that. I think we have to speak out. And even as a Nigerian, American myself, is like, grew up here, but even me realizing, this is a pivotal point. People, I'm so thankful that people even care that this is happening. Honestly, like I said, thousands, almost 100,000 people since 2009 have been murdered or kidnapped. So, but we're talking about this now. So this is our point and our time to do something. Yeah. What do we need to do? We need to, America, just like we've seen what President Trump do with take ownership with Israel, even with Ukraine and stuff like that, with diplomacy, we need to have that conversation now of what that looks like.
Yeah, because I don't think America first means America only. And I think we can walk and chew gum at the same time. I think you can clean up stuff here, but you could also see injustice happen worldwide and speak up. So the folks that are committing this genocide, the Muslims that are killing these Christians, they're not being sanctioned by the government. They're more like rebel groups. Is that correct?
Right.
And so, but the government's not stepping in or doing anything to stop it.
Right. So it's just well, yeah, sure. You can't fully point to this person's connected to this person in the government. Although I'm sure much people with much more expertise than I do have right now would be able to talk more into that. But it's very obvious that in different ways that, especially with that statement of that there's no genocide, when everyone in the world clearly sees that there's a genocide of Christians, that the help is not going to be coming from the Nigerian government.
Okay, so now what would be their reasoning for quote unquote saying there's no genocide, or what would be we're not just indiscriminately killing Christians, we're doing it because of, like, what's the Muslim rebels' explanation for what's happening and why they're doing this?
Well, the connection is that there's a reason. It's not just by accident that these Muslim and the administration, the last two administrations since 2009 have been Muslim and that have then at the same time then allow Boko Haram, why the girls who we needed to come back came back after 2009 when he was elected president. The coincidence, I'm not gonna go into conspiracy theories about that. I'm not gonna say that I have complete expertise there, but it's too much of a strong connection correlation of that, the fact that these uptick of people groups, and not just the Igbo group, right? It's like the Christians, anybody essentially, it comes down to religious freedom, that anybody who wants to be able to practice a religion that's different than what is becoming the predominant religion within the government, within and different spaces in Nigeria, that they're not having the ability, the freedom to practice those without consequence of even losing their own life. That's if we're going to talk about American ideals, Judeo-Christian ideals, like that is where, when it comes to foreign policy, that we have said for decades, for centuries, that we are going to be the people who are going to uphold values like that. So I think this is an opportunity for us to do that in Nigeria. Yeah.
Why do you think the folks that are railing against Israel and what's happening in Gaza, specifically folks on the right, the Candace Owens, the Tucker Carlsons, the Nick Fuentes, why do you think they seem to be very, very silent on what's happening in Nigeria?
I think it probably comes back to the fact that, it's been strong correlation of the Igbo people being connected to the Jewish people, being connected to Israel. So that's a long correlation there of, the lost tribe and stuff like that, that whole notion. But at the end of the day is that the Igbo people have been considered almost like the Jewish people of Nigeria, the Jewish people of Africa, of being ostracized and made to be in a certain spot because of their belief in one God. And that's been early on. So I think that's part of that connection there, that deep love for the Igbo people who also love Israel has been a connection there for almost since the beginning.
Gosh, it really does all go back to Israel. It's so sad. Okay. Do you think that if these Christians had similar gun rights that we have here and could arm themselves, that they could mitigate some of this? Or do you think that wouldn't make a difference? Because a lot of times the theory is, hey, like, a tyrannical government is going to first take away your guns.
Right.
And that's why so many people here are so spooked when there's gun laws that are consistently being pushed on people. Do you think that would make a difference in terms of what's going on in Nigeria?
Absolutely. See, that's the problem is that people see, I mean, obviously they're being killed with firearms. They're being killed with firearms, but by people who mysteriously are able to access these firearms, and then not the people who are the law-abiding people who want to use it for defense, right? So when you empower the people, let's actually go the opposite. When you disempower the people, that's what we saw here, and that's why the Second Amendment is so pivotal here, is that you're empowered as a civilian to be able to have a firearm and have that right to defend yourself. So therefore, when inevitably the bad guys, when the people who want to use it for harm and for evil have access to that firearms as much as you do, then you at least are able to defend your life and those that you care about against the people who are going to use that regardless of the law, right?
Yeah.
So in Nigeria, it's, rights are not, it's not obviously not like in America, but we see the same thing, for example, Mexico, right? Where only people who really have access to firearms are the people in the government, are the people, or cartels, are the people who shouldn't have firearms in the first place. But then the ones who actually need it to protect themselves and their families, as law-abiding people, law-abiding citizens, they're disempowered to protect themselves against those people who don't care about the law. So that it comes down to that, is that the government has to empower the individual citizen to be able to defend their lives. Will they be able to do that? No, not effectively if they don't have the same firepower as the organizations and the ones who have full monopoly of force, which is what we see in Nigeria.
Yeah, bad guys don't follow laws.
Right. It's simple.
Yeah.
It really is.
Let's debunk some of the notion around the anti-gun legislation that we see pushed. One of the biggest studies that came out a while ago was, hey, if you own a firearm, you're more likely to die by your own firearm than than you are for someone to come in and try to attack you. That's something that I've seen thrown around, right? Because it's just interestingly that when they talk about deaths, it's often omitted that a huge percentage of those deaths are suicide. So unpack that for me and how that's kind of a misnomer to say, hey, you're more likely to die by a death than you are to die from an intruder.
Right. I mean, we see the same thing, particularly in the woman space, right? They'll say the same thing with domestic violence, that a woman is more likely to have a firearm used against her, right, in a domestic violence situation than using it in defense. Well, yeah, because the statistics show that there are a lot less women who have firearms than the men that do, right? So the issue there isn't that there is a firearm in this situation. The issue is that who owns the firearm, who has the firearm, who has that means and access to defense in that situation as a man. So same thing here. It's using the same correlation of, at the end of the day, if we don't utilize that, empower the people who are trying to use it to defend their lives, then we disempower them and we empower those who are not going to follow the law. So that's what happens.
Yeah. Okay. Tell me why we need machine. Everyone says, wait, we need machine. Why do you need an AR-15? Why do you need an assault rifle? Tell me why we need those.
I think that it comes down to that false argument that's the premise there, is that the need, right? That it comes down to the fact that the only way that someone should have something is if someone deems it necessary. And then who is that someone, right? Are we only going to allow the government to make that decision for us if it's necessary for you, if you need something? There are so many different aspects of life where we don't deem some other entity to tell us what is important for us, but particularly as a God-given right to protect and defend ourselves. And also, unfortunately, to protect against a space where the government is made up of people who are sinners, right? And people who may or may not, but for the most part, are trying to preserve their power and not yours. Then we protect through those beliefs and values to make sure that we have a way to defend ourselves against those. So what do we need in order to do that? I don't know what we need in order to do that. If it was October 7th and that same thing happened in America, Would you need an AR-15? Absolutely. Would you need a fully automatic? Absolutely. Why? Because you don't know what the other guy has.
Well,
and you need to be able to have the same power as that other person does.
Yeah. Correct me if I'm wrong, but aren't fully automatic machines already not legal in America?
You
can't buy new ones. Like
right. Yeah. So the Hugh Amendment in the 1980s is essentially stopped that, the manufacturing of fully automatic. So that's why if you get one, it's very expensive. It's in the thousands of dollars, especially not in California. You're not getting it. But
is that what you have tattooed there?
That's my MP5 right there.
That's fully automatic.
This is fully automatic, yes. So it comes down to, what do you need? I don't know. If I'm in that situation, if I had a way to be able to see the future of what I'm going to need in that situation, then maybe I would say, well, in that situation, I'm only going to need this. But that's the problem, is that we don't know what we need until that situation happens. So let's empower the individual to make that decision for themselves. That's what we're trying to do.
Yeah. We need more common sense laws.
What's common sense?
You tell me.
Yeah.
They keep saying we need more common sense gun laws.
They keep changing what common sense that's the problem, is that they keep changing that standard. What is in relation to what is common sense? Common sense for those who push that, which honestly is a PR stance, they keep pushing that verbiage now, when if you looked at the 1980s in America, so let's just look at America, right? Not even looking at England, because that's different, right? Different trajectory, where in the 1990s, they completely banned all handguns. Well, they try to do the same thing in America. They try to ban the Brady Foundation and stuff like that, were actually, before they were about common sense laws, quote unquote, they were openly about banning all handguns. Then we had an African-American man in Chicago who went to the Supreme Court, Otis v. Chicago, McDonald v. Chicago, where he said, well, if the Second Amendment allows me to have a handgun, then why don't I have that in Chicago? Because they were trying to ban handguns in Chicago. That's where it kind of started. And it just shows, and he won. He won that case because the Second Amendment should apply no matter where you are, no matter who you are. Handguns was the first thing that they tried to ban. And so that was the AR-15 of that time. People, the big scary gun was the handgun then, because it was easy to conceal and to hide. Now it's completely changed now, right? We have a reverse psychology of, well, no, the AR-15 is the big bad gun now. So it continues to change. It changes when the Supreme Court and the legal system continues to say, no, it's to keep and bear arms, all arms. And that's the whole thing, is that you can say arms as in firearm, or you can say arms as in, hey, I need to defend myself, what I need to do right now be able to do that effectively. So we look at in London when they had their complete ban of knives. Why? Because the same idea and thinking of it's not the person, right? It's the weapon. And if that's your actual line of thinking, then you're gonna think a 3-inch knife is too much and you need to ban that. A dinner knife is too much and you need to ban that. Where does that end? It ends until you finally realize that it's not the weapon, it's the person.
Every time there's a mass shooting or school shooting, they always go, stop with your thoughts and prayers. We have to do something. And it usually goes to, we need to ban certain guns. We need to do something. What's your response to that? Because it does seem to be an uptick of mass shootings, regardless of how you classify them. What is your response to that? Well,
they do something every single time. That's the thing, is that the anti-gun side always pushes. I mean, what do we even see with after the Vegas shooting? What happened with the bump stocks? Was that the primary issue there? No, but bump stocks were banned afterwards. I mean, if anything, it's always on the side of, quote unquote, these common sense, there's always on the gun control side that we push legislation. That's the doing something every time, but yet the problem persists. So I think that was even my own awakening in that space. Because like I said, I grew up, I didn't grow up with firearms. My parents they didn't grow up with the Second Amendment or something like that. Like, to grow up in a space of the mass shootings that happened in Columbine, and that was me growing up, and then also seeing though that these policies that were pushed after every single one did not actually do anything to help the next one, right? So it was bad policy.
Yeah.
And it continues to be bad policy.
Well, it seems to be bad policy, but also bad policy at the expense of people that actually do need firearms in cities that they can't get them in. So I went down this rabbit hole one day, and I don't know if you've ever done this, but I looked at the crime and the deaths in Chicago versus Atlanta, and they couldn't have more diametrically opposed laws, right? Atlanta, every time I'm in Atlanta, everybody has all the time. Right.
For the state of Georgia.
Yeah, it's the state of Georgia.
Right.
Every time I'm in Chicago, you're not allowed to have except the bad guys that have, right? And so, but when I looked at the crime rates and I looked at the murder rates, they were very similar despite Chicago having way harsher laws, with the caveat that you were less likely to get robbed in Atlanta. You were less likely to have your house broken into in Atlanta. And that's because more people are armed in Atlanta. And so it's like you could have two cities, similar demographics, very opposite laws, and you get the same exact results, except you have less break-ins, less robberies, less home invasions in the city where more people are armed.
Right. I mean, even like see what's going on with, I know people are going to say different things about what's happening with Trump and agree or disagree what's the whole push for National Guards in different cities in Memphis and now Portland got the green light for that. People who are living in Chicago saying, this is probably the safest I've ever seen Chicago, or I've ever seen Virginia or DC. What's the difference there? The men in uniform or women in uniform? No. What do they have? What do they have? And exactly. So they have that, and we know, we can trust that. We can feel safe walking around with guys in uniform with firearms because they know that the good guy is the one with the firearm. That's the difference.
Yep. Okay. One of the things that's often omitted is the number of crimes that are prevented when good guys have firearms. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of crimes annually prevented because folks have firearms.
500,000 to upwards of 3 million.
Yeah.
That's
break that down for me, because it's like you can pick away at the Second Amendment all you want, but that comes that's very ignorant if you don't understand how many crimes are prevented. So unpack that for me.
Right. And I going back to the fact that even brandishing, even that study, that Lex study that you're referring to, brandishing the fact that, hey, I'm not gonna actually pull this trigger, but you know that I could, has been enough also to deter attacks. And I'm talking about particularly with women, right? Because what do criminals do? I mean, this is statistically shown and proven in many studies. They are picking the best opportunity to do the most amount of damage in the least amount of time, and they pick their opportunity through the victim, and that's why a lot more women are usually victims of men, right? Of male criminals, right? And they believe which is science, pound per pound, a man is stronger than a woman, and so that's why a firearm becomes a equalizer for so many women, and that's why in these studies, even the brandishing of that firearm is enough to deter some type of attack, because they know that there's now firepower that is going to be an equalizer in this space. So that's why that happens. Yeah.
Any other myths you want to debunk before we move on?
Oh man, so many myths. Oh man, I couldn't even. I think we've covered a lot of them. All the big ones.
Yeah. Okay. So one of the things that's often thrown out specifically about Charlie Kirk is this quote that said, in order to have the Second Amendment, there's going to have to be there's going to be some deaths because of the Second Amendment, right? That was thrown around a lot right after he died. People celebrating, people dismissing it, people not showing compassion as like, oh, it's ironic he got, killed by a gun death, when he said that, man, a certain number of gun deaths are required to maintain a Second Amendment. Can you contextualize what he was saying there? Because that's a quote that is often attributed to him as like a gotcha.
Yeah. And yeah, definitely after I found out about that, of course, in this day and age, likely it's going to be someone, that's just a weapon of choice for anybody, right? Regardless if it's a knife or et cetera. So the statistically speaking of someone's going to kill you, yes, there's that, of course, that common denominator. Do I think that is what would have changed the trajectory of what happened with Charlie? Absolutely not. Because how do we know that? We know that because that's what he said, that he wasn't killing him because I'm going to talk about firearm deaths. I'm killing you because of your viewpoint, of your something that I couldn't handle. Like, that's why that man did that, what he did. So let's always, again, at the end of the day, it comes down to the person. It comes down to what the person did, whether if he was going to utilize a firearm or a knife or whatever, or a bomb. He had a goal in mind, and it was to end what the truth. It was to end what Charlie was saying, whatever way he utilized it to do so. So I think it comes down to that, though. It really does come down to that. And I think particularly like going back to the fact that when I became a Christian, of that switch of realizing that difference is when you know the sin nature, when you know that your nature, the human nature, doesn't change, and you know that we need a savior in order to be fully changed, right? So when you have that foundational truth, I think you finally realize what the real problem is.
Yeah, but what do you think he was trying to say with regards to that quote? And I'm assuming you've heard the quote.
Right. And
is he saying, hey, because people are going to have access to these things, there's going to be a certain number of suicides?
Right.
Or was he saying, hey, man, yeah, like there's going to be mass shootings and like it sucks? Like, what do you think he was getting at with that specific quote?
Well, I think it comes to it's the age-old question of the cost of freedom. The cost of freedom is that there are going to be people who utilize freedom for good and people who utilize freedom for evil. And it doesn't take away the fact that we are owed that freedom and that we need to protect that freedom. And so I think that is a natural cost of, even free will, right? That why didn't God just make it where none of us had to sin anymore? Why, those age-old questions that people talk about, well, if he knew this and this and this, well, we have freedom, and there are people who utilize it in the wrong way. And I think that's what he was talking about, was that, yes, there are going to be people who utilize firearms in a way to kill other people and to spread evil and hate, but there are going to be even more people who utilize that to stop those evil people who want to utilize firearms in a way to kill people and to spread hate.
Yeah, and that seems like the data supports that. Like, there seems to be more preventative killings when people have, or assaults when people are armed versus when people are not armed. And I think that's the opportunity cost of that is not factored in. I also find it interesting that no one ever uses that logic to argue against cars, because there's a certain level of risk every single person has when they get into a car. And even if, a certain number of car deaths are only impacting the person who is driving, meaning, like, let's just say hypothetically 50% of car deaths are the person driving in themselves, and then there's a certain amount where people who are recklessly driving and speeding harm other people. I would think most people would say, no, that's a fair exchange. We should still maintain this ability to drive a car, even though, yes, certain people end up harming themselves, certain people end up harming other people. And it seems like a fair parallel with regards to firearms. Hey, there's a certain number of people that they're unfortunately going to get a hold of a firearm and take their own life. And I want to say that's at least 50%, right? It's a very high percentage of the number of deaths are from suicide.
Yeah, it's upwards of high 60s to 70% of deaths are from suicide. And does that mean, and we can even look at Australia, these places that people hail as the bastions of, well, we should be doing, this is what law should look like going forward. And even that, if you look statistically, the differences, even in England, right, that banned handguns, etc., of what did suicides go down? No, it was the way that they committed suicide that changed, right? So again, it's this false idea that the origin comes from the firearm, the origin comes from the technology, the weaponry. No, it comes down to where people don't want to go to, which is the sin nature.
Yeah. What are there any gun laws you would support?
Any gun laws I would support? You know what? People ask me that question, and honestly, we are so far behind. We're the look of, even in the last 30 years, of what this is why I'm saying, when people say, why don't we do anything, the control side has won so much so that we're talking about, like, the gun laws here in California of, the fact that you have to even do a background check to get to get ammunition in California, right? The fact that even background checks itself, people think that that's some type of always been in existence, is actually something pushed around in the last 30 years from the gun control lobby. So I think we're so far behind with rights that we're nothing close to shall not be infringed.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't support any more laws.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, we have like a cool down law here in California. I'm not mad at that one. You know, if a guy has to wait a couple of days before buying a when he can actually pick it up.
But but why cool down? I just love.
You don't like the
I love the
language?
verbiage of that. Yeah, it's just the PR packaging of
It's great.
the gun control side is just superior.
Yeah.
They really do a great job of like even utilizing how they say things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So, what a cool down law? So say for you.
I'm gonna look up the actual
For you,
law.
is it you have to cool down just to get your firearm on the same day versus the next day?
Okay. In California, a cool down period for firearm purchase refers to the mandatory 10-day waiting period that applies
Right, 10
to the
days.
sale or transfer of all firearms. This period gives the California Department of Justice to conduct a background check on the purchaser, applies to all firearms, 10-day wait period covered all transfer. I think 10 days is too long, if I'm being honest.
And it's usually more than that. That's the average. Do you remember during COVID how long it would take?
I got mine within 10 days. It was pretty quick.
During COVID?
Yeah, I got a couple firearms during COVID.
Okay. That's fine.
Well, it was.
I was gonna say the backlog,
Was it like
even
2020?
Colorado was.
I don't know if it was 2020, but 2021, I got a bunch of firearms in the middle of COVID, and it wasn't 10 days. I think it was faster than that. I think.
Really?
Yeah, I
because
think
from
so.
what when I was in Colorado, I mean, it was a backlog because essentially the essential workers weren't there, right? So, but at the end of the day, it's an instant background check. So they are looking at this almost instantly. It's not something that they're, having to take that long of a time. The cooling down is not. The onus is not on the government; it's on you. It's saying that you need to cool down. I mean, then that's the posture of laws like that. But think about the woman who has a stalker and or is in a domestic violence situation. What she needs to cool down.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Yeah. Okay. Any other latest stuff you want to address before we move on?
Oh man. I think we were talking about this of almost a decade of starting Empower 2A and doing work with Empower 2A and just even my own personal convictions of not that rights are not women's rights, etc. Just that God's been working with me in that conversation of just not keeping it at that conversation. And it's not the ultimatum. Our ultimate power and our strength as women, as men, but I can speak as a woman. Our healing, our power, and our strength should always point to the Lord, and it comes from the Lord, whether we see that or not, whether we see the truth or not. And so I just have felt that messaging at one point felt like I was almost repurposing and repackaging feminism. And I kind of just want to address that because not that I love the work that I did with Empower 2A. I love the work that God did, that Jesus did through me. I've through that space. But I do want people to remember that the ultimate power and strength comes from Jesus Christ, and that we can't put all of our hope and security in a firearm. Although we should have the ability and rights to do that, to be able to protect ourselves. Just remember where your true hope and power comes from is what I want to end with.
That's so interesting to hear you say, because I feel like the work you were doing was so needed specifically for equipping women.
Absolutely, yeah.
Right? But then you said like you felt, a part of you still felt like it was just feminism repackaged. Like tease that out for me, because I feel like, I think both things can be reconciled. I think it's like, hey, women should be trained on how to use firearms to protect themselves.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you can love Jesus because you are a woman who is trained, or because you're a woman who's trained, because you love Jesus, you become a woman who is trained. How do you feel like in your own heart that was sliding into like, I guess, promoting feminism?
And
let me understand that.
And that's kind of a conviction for me. It was a conviction that I felt my messaging, my focus became more and more about that specific part of it. Not that it was bad. And again, that we can't talk about those things, but I just wanted to freely be able to speak about where my true healing comes from. Because my story was really connected a lot with SA with that conversation of the fact that, you know, I lost my power when I became a victim, and a lot of women resonated with that. But I also wanted to talk more about my faith, and I felt in those Second Amendment spaces that there's only so much that you can talk about. It's a little too Christianese at one point, you know, for certain people. And I got a lot of that type of that hard stop there. And I felt like if I'm really going to be able to speak about where my true hope and faith comes from freely, and to help heal women fully, of course, talk about the fact that they should be able to have a way to defend themselves. That's great. But then we also need to talk about the healing aspect that has to come after that too. And where does that healing come from? So that was my personal conviction. Do I say, you know, that's wrong or anything? No. But I do think when the conversation is constantly that, it's tempting for, I think, sometimes the conservative movement, which, I mean, I'm just going to call it out too, because sometimes when you're talking about, like, even with Candace Owens, of wanting to call out things like, the left is always about, you know, promoting Black people and Black spaces only because they're Black. And then, like, seeing things that are almost, again, just the right repackaging left values in a right package, right? And the package that's going to help them. And so just things like that, I feel like we need to call a little bit more of, and me obviously have to call myself out of, like, where was that coming from? Was that coming from I also noticed in my own heart, a heart that did not want to submit, and I'm married, right? That heart that almost felt like it was okay to be this person living as a feminist, but be a conservative woman.
Interesting.
To look like a conservative woman. And not that it was on purpose, but I do think the heart of it has to come down to it. Why was I so adamantly against fully going into that message of biblical womanhood? I realized part of it was because I didn't want to submit, and I was also pushing the message of, you know, taking power into your own hands, and essentially where some self-reliant person who doesn't know about Jesus Christ is going to have a hard time having that submission question, because they've only been told that, hey, power is in your own hands, though. Right? So I just think I had to realize that my conviction had to go even stronger than that, like had to be strong enough to show that there is a difference.
That's good.
I'm gonna pull a Forrest Frank in the double awards on this one. Okay, so this is my personal conviction. God's been working on me.
Yeah.
So
do you think having kids contributed to that?
I think having kids, but also I'm in year 6 of marriage too. You know, and being a wife and being in a space and everything. So yeah, I think all of it. But most ultimately, we're biblical womanhood, and honestly, also Erica. I see something in her. Just that she was able to utilize that space at the memorial to talk about biblical womanhood. And I think there's been a space, you talk about in your podcast a lot with men, about men manning up and being men. Well, they need women to be women, right? For that to happen. And what does that look biblically? And I think a lot of us have just kind of gotten, as women, soft on the image of what the Bible really says about biblical womanhood, and how that can be a good thing, and how it is a good thing. Not how it can be, how it is a good thing, and how my mom was a single parent. Like I've grown up in that space of being a self-reliant, independent woman. But then year 6 of marriage, and that starts to come out of like, what does that look like practically, of how I honor my husband, how I submit to my husband. Can I do the same thing the world says that I can do and get away with it? Or is that going to eventually come up if we're not doing it the way the Bible tells us to do it?
Yeah, that's good. That's interesting. I think
I'm going to get stuff on that one, I'm sure.
Yeah, no, but I think it's good. I think it's good to consider these things, because I think on the surface it'd be like, oh, this is a good thing that you were doing, but for you it felt like it was getting in the way of what God wanted you to do and what God wanted you to be known for.
It was getting the message, the central message. And I think that's what it comes to. It's like, again, Christian, conservative Christian, what is your message?
Yeah.
You know, and what message are we sharing with other people and other women? And what are you'll know very quickly when they're saying it back to you.
Yep.
And then what is the fruit that you're seeing in their life?
Yeah.
If the fruit isn't pointing to Jesus, like I was going back to, it's like it's not pointing to Jesus, and it's pointing to self-reliance. It's pointing to the culmination of this is going to give me power, and I'm going to be safe after this. Then they've missed the real message.
Yeah. Okay. Now, was some of this also contributed to when you kind of had I don't know what the right word is, but there was kind of a deviation you had from some of the folks in the conservative space post George Floyd and some of the police brutality stuff that was happening, which I think some of it the media was definitely taking and blowing out of proportion.
Right.
But then other stuff was like, hey, that seemed pretty wrong. Why are we sticking to the regular narrative? And that's kind of some of your critique. I remember there was a famous call with you and a bunch of black conservatives, and you guys were kind of having this in-house conversation. Tell me about that and how much did that contribute to your evolution?
Oh man, I think that was eye-opening for me. It was eye-opening for me, and maybe, who knows, maybe this whole thing can be eye-opening for certain people too, of the consequences of your rhetoric. Mm-hmm. The fruit of what you say has consequence. If the fruit of what you say and the people who are supporting your message are not reflecting truth and love, they're not reflecting, I wouldn't say it in that way, they're not reflecting the things that you would espouse as someone who loves the Lord. Like, again, your core message, if they're not reflecting that back to you, then I think that's when you need to start reassessing, hey, what am I saying? And why is it inciting this type of reaction? So I think it was with George Floyd and everything. Of course, yes, we can critique culture, we can critique things like that are bad. But if we're not doing it, again, with in truth, in love, we're not speaking truth in love, and that's not being reflected back to us, then we know we're missing the mark. I think that was part of it, is I didn't see that, and that made me kind of step back of like reassessing, like, okay, God, have I made this more about conservatism and less about you? Like, I needed that space to be able to reassess and to see, do I need to do things differently? Do I need to have a softer tone? Do I need to reflect differently to people on how I package and say, you can say truth, but how do I say it in a way that honors you and also brings people back to you? If I'm not sharing the gospel, if I'm not bringing people back to you, and they see me as a conservative and they don't see, they didn't know I was, I loved Jesus, then there's a problem.
Yeah. Yeah. Cause I think there's a way to speak truth on hard matters,
right,
without, dehumanizing people or dismissing concerns that people have. I think the flip side to that is also like how much of the police brutality stuff was, hey, these are real issues that we should be concerned about because bad policing impacts all people, including
criminal justice reform.
Including white folks, right? Versus like, man, when you pick away at the data, like I remember looking into this, and it's like you pick away the data, and it's like you're more likely to be stung by a bee and die than you are to die unarmed by a police officer. Like it's crazy the disparities. But for a while it was like that was the main thing that everyone was talking about, right? It's also the explosion of the internet, and like now we're seeing these videos all the time. And so I wonder how much of that also played in how folks saw this, and the perception of this was like, this is happening all the time because you're just watching these videos over and over.
Right.
And in reality, there's probably about a dozen of these situations that went viral.
Right.
And then there's other ones that didn't have video. Did that merit the response of like defund the police, abolish the police? And then what happened when that happened in major cities? You found out that the folks in these areas, black folks in these areas, actually don't want to defund the police.
Right.
It's like white liberal cope, right? And so like it's such an interesting, convoluted conversation that there's so many layers to,
Right,
So how do you feel about it now, 5 years removed from George Floyd?
Yeah.
And how do you process all of it now?
And it wasn't even just George Floyd, because like you were saying, it was honestly, it was and that's why people need to call it out for what it was. That was the popular media space to talk about, right? Like that was the thing to talk about. And so we saw all of these different instances, which are these things happening every day? Of course they are. But we saw this time period, particularly during COVID, where we were seeing it constantly. But even in my own world, my own space, the Second Amendment space, that was, with the Ahmaud Arbery, for example, it's an example of seeing of that basically people who were for the Second Amendment, who were adamantly going to defend completely the people who use their firearms for self-defense, but then suddenly, if anything, be quiet. If anything, even be against people like Ahmaud Arbery in that situation, and be on the side of well, I don't know that this person might have been in the wrong for this first, versus when we see on different instances where they were defending them for their Second Amendment rights, and then we, at the end of the day, in the legal instance, see that it was in fact actual racism. It was in fact hatred. It wasn't so. And when you see that inconsistency, and then also people like me who are trying to message to minorities and to women and people like that, say, hey, no, the Second Amendment is on your side too, and the space is for you too. When they see that inconsistency of the work that we're trying of what's going on, and it brings us back decades, right? Of people who are trying to do the real work of bringing more people, including more people, into our space. So that was another thing, just an outreach side of seeing people who really weren't consistent about their message and changing the message when it didn't suit them, right? So that was part of why I also felt like I had to step back, because I was seeing people who were being hypocrites and inconsistent with the Second Amendment message, even just on that instance.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I just had a conversation with a black conservative recently about this, and I was like, I remember that, and I remember seeing that video, and he was like, well, Ahmaud lunged at the guys with the guns, and that's why they fired on him. And I was like, I didn't even remember the particulars of the case, but I remember that being the justification. Yet at the same time, he did say that because then I referenced the lady who was killed for rebuking the police officers in the name of Jesus, right?
Oh yeah.
And then this person conceded that one particular conservative influencer, well, yeah, he just has a bias. And I'm like, yeah, but like, if your bias is always for the police narrative, and they can never do any wrong under any circumstances, which I don't remember if the police officer was charged in that situation with the lady.
I don't think he was.
Let's look that up, because I want to make sure that we're accurate. But the if the consistent narrative is like, hey, we're just going to take the side of the police no matter what, and there's never a time where you can condemn the cops' actions. Right. That does seem like a bias that is not without consequence. Right. And then it paints that the police can never do no wrong. And it's like, everyone knows, white, black, everyone knows you catch a police officer on the wrong day and they can be hostile. Right.
Or that we're all sinners and that we make mistakes. And of course some people can do wrong. That's part of it.
Yeah, so it looks like former sheriff deputy Sean Grayson faces murder trial in fatal shooting of Sonia Macy. So
that's October 20th.
Yeah, that's just now. Yeah, so it says Grayson was charged with first-degree murder and has pled not guilty. Jury selection is set to begin on Monday. Grayson was charged with a total of 3 counts in connection to Macy's first-degree murder aggravated. The trial will take place in Peoria, Illinois, after it was moved from Sang County due to extensive media publicity. So this would be interesting how this plays out.
Yeah, I mean, but we saw the same thing with the trial with Ahmaud Arbery, because I mean that was a long trial to the point because it became something of, is racism involved in this? And they had to find out that yes, racism was involved with that. Or Breonna Taylor, things like that with the search warrants and what that looks like. Looking at that, so I know at that time too, I was talking to a lot of people about the Second Amendment aspects of, hey, that's fine if we're gonna be on this side for certain cases, like we saw with what's his name, Kyle
Rittenhouse.
Yeah, Rittenhouse. Yeah. With that, okay, fine, that's fine. I'm gonna be on that side with you for that, because that was a self-defense case too. But then Ahmaud Arbery was a self-defense case too. So let's just be consistent here.
That's fair. And so now that you're kind of speaking a bit more, you're sharing a bit more, what is your current relationship with the conservative space, right? Because you were pretty deep in it, and then some of this stuff kind of pulled you out, and now you're speaking out more. even though it's not primarily just 2A stuff.
Yeah.
What's your current relationship as a Christian first, conservative, Second Amendment activist second?
Yeah. Well, I've really got into maybe just being on the history side of things, of just educating the public about where my love for the Second Amendment came from. It came from our history, particularly as a Black woman, that it made sense that I would eventually become an advocate. And people were always like, how do you see that connection there? Well, history has shown us that. And so even earlier this year, I started at Berkeley. I'm on a tour that we're doing right now with the Claire Luce Booth Foundation. And it's talking about just the history of the Second Amendment, particularly with African Americans, particularly with women, and why we see such a major rise in Black women becoming gun owners like we've never seen before. But that's because this was the moment for that to happen. And we're just seeing just generations of that work finally culminate in this space right now, statistically, of why Black women particularly are becoming gun owners. It's no accident. So I've been speaking on college campuses about that, and just being able to resonate. I mean, I got to speak with at Berkeley, and there they came up to me saying that they haven't had a conversation like that in maybe 30 years, just talking about the Second Amendment, and that they were thankful that they were able to just see it in a different space, in a different light that they haven't seen before. So I think there's so much work that still can be done on the college campuses, and even in just wanting to honor Charlie and his work and what he's done in my own space, in my own way of going back to college campuses like I started out with TPUSA when I did it in 2016, 2017 on tour. So just kind of trying to do that in my own little way and honor the work that he's done and he's been doing up until the day that he died. Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, where can they find out more information? How can they get a hold of you? If someone wanted to bring you to their campus to speak, how do they get a hold of you? Yeah, they can go to the Claire Luce Booth Foundation and ask to have me speak, and I would love to come in and speak at their college campus. So I'll be there fall and spring. So come up and contact them and let me know that you want me to speak at your campus. All right. Antonia, thank you so much. So if you enjoyed this conversation, I wanted to let you know that Antonia Cover will be at the upcoming Bless God Summit happening March 5th, 6th, and 7th here in beautiful Oceanside, California at the Seabird Resort. She'll be joining myself, Wes Huff, KB and Amin from Southside Rabbi, Michael Knowles, Justin Early. It's going to be a stellar lineup of speakers, apologists, and all sorts of amazing entertainers as well, like my man Dustin Tavella and Indie Tribe. So if you want to get more information, get your tickets now before they're gone. Go to blessgodsummit.com or hit the link in the pinned comment below. All right, I can't wait to see you guys at the Bless God Summit here in Oceanside, California. Peace.